Welcome to another Gran Turismo Sport tutorial. Today we're featuring the weekly race B at... Can y'all guess at this point for how long this track has been on the channel for? Yes, it's Tokyo Expressway Central Outer Loop, and I've done countless tutorials on this track. But this time I swear it's relatively completely different. Because this time around it's the Group 4 Daily Race B. And I'll admit, the best people in the world are using the Alfa Romeo 4C, which I'm actually quite bad at driving. So I don't particularly like to say, because technically speaking, Alfa Romeo is Mopar, and the loosest definition possible. But, yeah. I don't really like mid-engine rear-wheel drive cars all that much. They're not my specialty. But, as far as I can tell, I have about the fastest time there is in a different car, being the Toyota GT86 Group 4 car. And that time is a 1:16.7, which as of recording this video at about noon on Thursday of the event, that puts me 7th in the America's region, highest of anything but a 4C. My best time in a 4C is a 1:16.9, so also the lap and analyze it in the GT86, whatever, 86 GT. I'll just say the Toyota now on, the Toyota Group 4, and so y'all can actually run a different car for this event in case you're like me and don't really like the 4C that much in the game. I feel like I'd like driving a 4C a lot more than I like driving the Toyota in real life, but GT Sport, yeah, at least for me, the Toyota is better than the Alfa Romeo, which is technically... No, I can't even say a Toyota is better than anything that has anything whatsoever to do with a Mopar. I just can't make myself do that. But what I can do is show this lap, which I shall do now, instead of wasting over 2 minutes and 30 seconds on the intro, I just noticed. But honestly, this tutorial will be shorter than the general ones, just because, honestly, yeah, I've done a whole heck of a heap of tutorials here. But I'll still do it turn by turn like usual, and hopefully this will have a runtime of under 30 minutes. Hopefully, that's the goal. Let's get into it. To begin with, general stuff, like always, on a controller and automatic transmission. So, I think honestly a lot of people are doing really crazily good times in the 4C have a wheel. That car's kind of twitchy, but I don't know, hard to say because carts are also twitchy and I'm pretty good with them with a controller, so I don't know. I mean, a cart will spin and a 4C won't, so maybe that has something to do with it, but nonetheless, this is the Toyota. Not even going to attempt to do much in a 4C. I don't like that car track combination. But in the GT86 Toyota, say that, Toyota, it's pretty cotton picking easy to drive, honestly. Especially relative to the 4C. Going into your best lap, you actually take the same line, theoretically, as your best lap if you do it absolutely perfect. If not, go a bit wide. But honestly, the lap that I was on, I went ahead and did it about as perfect as I could. He's actually got 2 consecutive laps in which I improved my time, which is almost never happens for me, but again, this car is pretty easy to drive, so I can drive it pretty consistently. So anyway, carry momentum to the best lap. So okay, once I get onto this turn on the best lap, I won't analyze it as much because I'm really just doing it here. So that way you know the momentum into it. Just remember this is the last turn. I'm just doing it first, so you have momentum into your best lap. Ultimately, there ain't much braking. I'd say I'm on the brakes for less than a second total. Ultimately, I decelerate from not even 120 down to over 100 still by the time I'm off the brakes. The rest just coast. Coast until you are looking like you're going to hit the apex, and then accelerate so that you don't literally hit the apex, meaning don't hit the actual barrier there. Hit the apex in relative terms, but not literal terms. If that makes any sense. But whatever, I think y'all get it. Just get as close to that as possible without hitting it. Throttle control is the best way to do that. If you start drifting slightly away from it, then let off the throttle. If it's looking like you're about to hit it, lessen your steering input and go from there. Ultimately, if you start varying the throttle to the point in which you stay on the apex long enough, pretty much once you're about to 98 miles an hour, you start getting carried out. You want to start getting carried out a little bit before this marker. A good way that I use to memorize that is just memorize the surroundings more than anything. That marker is there. I'm a little bit before getting to this building completely, so they're slowly, but that building slowly. And then you would just naturally carry out full throttle. Honestly, I did that turn pretty much perfect as I can do. Again, probably best way to do it is no variation of the throttle whatsoever, but ultimately this car is easy and stable enough to drive where slightly changing the throttle input would not throw the car off, really even whatsoever. More than anything, just more stable throttle does than anything is just, it's more of a fluid motion. So it may gain you milliseconds, but not all that much. That's about as perfect as I can do this particular turn. But on to the lap itself, where I'll be honest, I can probably still get about one more tenth. But as of now, I'm 7th in the Americas region with a 116.76 something. And the 7.6 whatever is important. Actually, it's 7.62, I remember now. Is important on the lower end, but not on the higher end. Meaning, the person behind me has like a .765 or something like that in the Americas region. And then the next time it's like a 7.69. But then the person directly ahead of me has like a .506 or something. So, okay, gaining a tenth of a second will literally do nothing in my overall rankings in the Americas region. They're helping the world rankings, which has an album roughly about 50th, but that's not all that important to me. Because the world rankings don't necessarily matter when you're paired up in a regional basis. It's kind of still PD logic, especially now that less people play the game. You should probably just go ahead and make it pair with world, but whatever, not my problem. This first turn, though, is kind of a problem. By default, this is generally the most turn that you have the most experience on, especially if you're someone like me, where if you just mess up to the point of you ain't getting a better lap, you restart anyway. So by default, that happens the most on the first turn, because that's the turn you do the most if you're restarting throughout the lap when you mess up. So yeah, there's really no true way to judge a braking point here, I'll be quite honest, because there's not really much braking. The previous turn I said was less than about a second of braking. This is maybe not even half a second, and then as y'all saw there too, it was only full braking, pretty much just eighth half, and then a slight about medium amount of brakes a little bit later. So it's almost no braking, but there is a little bit of braking. But ultimately brake enough and coast enough where you get to the apex at a slightly over 120 miles an hour, albeit this is where I lost a very tiny bit of time. As y'all can see, I wasn't perfectly on the apex or that one either. I would say I can probably get half a mile an hour more using up the entire amount of space. Ultimately, I think this doesn't matter more than about 300ths of a second or so, but still I could use slightly more space there. Essentially how you use slightly more space is turn in just a very slight amount earlier, so that way you hit the apex a very slight amount before, and then just carry a very slight amount more momentum, so that way you get carried more to this side. But ultimately, as long as you're going about 120 miles an hour, once you're at the very apex, you're good. And then this next turn is full throttle. There's a little bit of iffiness involved here, but not too terrible, because it is full throttle. Just turn to the point of where you're on the apex, and it doesn't matter exactly where you get to the apex here, and you don't even have to be right on it either. Just do what you feel comfortable with. If you want to go a little bit out wide, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because even though it is more distance traveled, you're carrying more momentum on a straightaway. It's like NASCAR. Sometimes the top line is a faster line. I've somewhat discussed this before, and this is a turn where that's a great example of it. This turn, ultimately, as long as you don't hit anything and go full throttle, you're pretty much good no matter how you do it. Same with this little bend here with 2, I wouldn't even call that a turn, just be right on apex and you're good. And my split time there was a 1:6.7. I would say my best is about a 1:3.7-ish. This next turn, though, I did pretty much perfect. Because, well, it's even less braking than the first 2 turns, which also barely had any. That's it. That's all the braking. You literally just tap the brakes pretty much immediately and then get immediately off them. Though, brake timing isn't too hard for this turn. Just once you start descending on the hill, brake. Like right there. Once that hill starts going down, just tap on the brakes very slightly. And as long as that gets you down to about 145, just start coasting. And then the momentum will naturally carry you to the apex. If you're on 134 miles an hour, once you're at the apex, you'll naturally be carried off full throttle. Again, I did this turn pretty much perfectly, as y'all saw there. There was a lot less gap to the walls than there was in the previous main turn. I mean, a lot less. I mean, like 8 inches either way, but still, relative speaking to racing, that is somewhat a lot. So, take that as you may. But anyway, split time here is a 0.40. So that's, again, at this point there's maybe about 300 that could be gained. And then this turn, this is the Toyota has a lot more straightaway speed than the Alfa. At max amount of speed it can carry about 3 to 4 miles an hour more. But this turn, it actually even turns better than the Alfa from what I've seen. Even the best time in the world, relative to miles per hour, I don't exactly know. But the best time with miles an hour that I've seen can take this turn about 126. Well, that's how I take the turn. Again, slight dab on the brake, slightly more than the last turn, but again, probably only about half a second. And then more coasting. There's a lot of coasting here. There's not actually much trail braking because there's just not that much braking in general. But there is a lot of coasting with Group 4 cars here. Coaster on the apex, then on the throttle, and yes folks, you're actually going 127 when you get on the throttle. AKA, you carry more speed into the turn by default because the car is slightly faster on the straightaway. Yet you can also carry more speed at the apex of this turn and only this turn. This is the only turn where I feel like the Toyota is truly better than the 4C. It's just better on the straight. So in my opinion, it equals out to the point of it's actually slightly better overall. That's just my opinion on it. And actually going 127 full throttle once you hit the apex, boom, you're good. You're right to that wall, and honestly, I did that turn quite perfectly. I really don't think I could gain any more around there. I did not hit that wall. I'm not even kidding, that's as perfect as I could physically do that turn. And once you're off this turn and completely done turning, maybe accelerate for about 1 second more and then let off the throttle, dab on the brakes. I'd say about 1 second of braking here, I'll show it in full time. Brake, off. It might actually be only about 3/4 of a second, all things considered. So about 3/4 of a second of braking there. But honestly, despite not too much braking like a lot of the turns, this is unlike a lot of the turns because with this car, or even the 4C, in my opinion, this is overall the hardest section on track, meaning this turn and then the left-hander that comes after it. It's easier in this car for me just because everything in general is easier with this car for me. But ultimately, you have to get the braking and throttle variation exactly perfect. Because if you go out wide, you're pretty much guaranteed to hit this wall at about this point. But if you go even a little bit narrow, you hit that wall. And if you hit that wall, you ultimately hit this wall. And if you hit this wall, you ultimately hit the next wall, more likely than not. So essentially in about a 2-second span, there's a darn good chance that you can hit between 1 and 3 walls. I would say I hit at least one of the walls 60% of the time, maybe. And if I don't hit one of the walls, I have to decelerate to the point of I'm way off speed, and it still kills the laps. Anyway, so I make this turn good about 5% of the time. Judge my driving skill as you may, like I've said before. Also, throttle variation for me is barely any throttle. And then fully on the throttle. Pretty much fully on the throttle. And going 114 once you're on the throttle. Which gets you again to the apex without hitting it. And this is also about perfect. But again, I don't do this turn even good most of the times, and only really ever, I think twice ever I've done this turn perfect. Perfect in this car, you care about 114, because look, 114 naturally carries you out to the point of you're pretty much on this apex, so that's that, folks. It's not as good as a 4C. 4C can carry about 116-ish. It loses speed quicker because it doesn't have as much horsepower, though. And obviously, because it doesn't have much horsepower as well, it doesn't gain speed back as fast either, so maybe relatively speaking, the Toyota's overall better around this section, but the 4C beats it in momentum carried, so whatever. But the 4C is a lot more loose around this section, too. I cannot do this section whatsoever in the 4C. Most speed I've ever been able to carry with 4C through here is about 111. 30 miles an hour is a pretty cotton-picking big difference, all things considered. And I do it a lot less accurately in a 4C than this. Again, other people can carry about 115, 116 maybe, but not me. That's what I did in the Toyota. And it kind of worked. It kind of worked to the point of this is my split time to this point. And this turn, you're gaining time on the 4C by this point if you're in this car, because you're carrying more speed. Simple as that. This turn is easily full throttle, just get right on the apex. Not too much steering input, so that way you're right on the outside for the next turn. And this next turn is, I'd say not too bad, because the braking point's pretty obvious here, which is nice. Right as the tunnel ends, get on the brakes. Right there. Essentially, it's actually a little bit before the complete tunnel ends, but it's slightly after the lights end. So therefore, as you can see, the shadow is dimming. So as the shadow starts to dim part of the tunnel, that's when you get on the brakes. And there's actually quite a bit of braking for this turn. I would say slightly over a second, and then just again more throttle variation if needed. But I was able to do it to where I just completely coasted and I was good. Throttle variation if needed, but again, if you do it perfect, you don't actually need to do that. Again, only a few milliseconds there throttle variation in a stable car. But this time around, actually pretty much did this turn perfect. Full throttle though, off. Actually, I wasn't quite full throttle for a bit. Well, there was extremely slight throttle variation a little bit of the ways into the turn, but ultimately going into the turn, I did about as perfect as I could. And ultimately, if you're on the throttle at about 108, you're good, and you will naturally carry to the side. But this car doesn't have enough power to actually accelerate yet. You need full lock to the left still in order to not hit that wall, so therefore full lock at 108 means you actually slow down to 107 even though you're full throttle. But ultimately 108 at the apex, 107 by the time the turn ends, and you're good. Next turn, you don't need to go out wide here, you can make it full throttle anyway, and actually naturally going full lock right will pretty much carry you out. If it doesn't completely, just adapt for that and then just turn slightly left to get more closer to the actual full outside here, so you can do this turn good. This turn is again where I lose a slip at a time. remember how 1 section I said I'd lose about 300ths of a second, and I said I can get about 1/10 of a second total. I would say this turn I lose about another 300ths of a second, which I know doesn't quite equal 1/10 of a second, but I will also give us slight around half a tenth of a second ish, slightly more, slightly less, whatever. Just in the sense of stability, again, throttle input and all that. It's not something that I can downright say, like it was in a previous turn or like it will in this turn. It's just slight stability change can give me a slight better time. But ultimately, nothing more to say there than just be smoother. Here, though, I can say I didn't do what I was saying here. I was not quite at the full outside. So ultimately, I could not carry as much speed because I didn't have as much angle. Ultimately, again, try to get on them up far outside as possible. So ultimately, that sort of messed me up here because, again, I wasn't too close to the side either. So sort of like the one turn where I said it last time. The general how to do the turn itself is the exact same, just the angle in which to start get to the apex is slightly more. Start out slightly wider so that way you can get on the apex slightly closer. And ultimately, again, there's some throttle variation there, slightly. Actually, very little. All things considered, not much. I'm pretty much immediately on the throttle. I'm either coasting or almost immediately on the throttle. But again, in order to do the turn perfectly, start with a slightly more angle so then you can carry a bit more speed. So because you're carrying a bit more speed, you need to allow the throttle for a little bit longer. But if you do that, you can get on the throttle immediately instead of a slight getting up the amount of throttle to begin with. Like I wasn't immediately full on the throttle. I had about half of a second of getting to full throttle. If you let off a little bit earlier with more of an angle, therefore you can get on the throttle slightly earlier as well if you're fully on the apex. And then ultimately, that's that. Oh yeah, I forgot I lost some time here too. Doing cricket, it's hard to believe that was actually truly bad. Yeah, okay, but I didn't even realize I hit the wall that hard in hindsight. I lost like 4 miles an hour hitting the wall there. I didn't even really realize that offhand, so yeah. Yeah, folks, okay, maybe I lost about a tenth of a second through this turn. But still, ultimately looking at that, maybe my best would be about a 0.6 even. Ultimately, I'd say to not hit the wall again, angle, but I would say instead of carrying about 96 here, be at about 95, and then you should be good. And then you're good to the line. Just stay on the outside here, and you're good. Just do the line itself. And there you have it, folks. 116.762 is my best, and again, I can probably bet I can get a 0.6 even. Here's the actual split times if you want to see that for yourselves. And actually, I think this might prove about a 0.6 even. And it says 0.641, and then again, I'm giving slightly less than about half a tenth-ish, give or take, just for smoothness. So that actually does completely add up to about a 0.6 even. But again, as you can see from these leaderboards, and as of recording this, they're still pretty much the same. Except one more driver ahead of me. A 0.6 even won't do anything. So, I ain't saying I ain't gonna try to improve my time at all, but for now, I ain't. I'll see what other people do and go from there. But for now, these leaderboards are pretty much accurate except this one position lower, aka all 4 C's in front of me. And still, almost an entire 2/10 of a second to move up even one position. But nonetheless, I'm plenty happy with this time because I'm not as happy driving the 4C around this track. So it's nice to drive something else and still be competitive. And I'd recommend you all do the same, because no matter how fast or slow you are in the 4C, there's pretty much no denying that the Toyota is a lot more stable car, so therefore you're probably going to want to use it in races either way. And I'd say that's not really worth a yeehaw, because I'd kind of rather use the Mopar, but I'd kind of rather use the Mopar or the Viper, all things considered. So, it ain't not worth a yeehaw either, I guess, because maybe y'all can at least use this somewhat to an advantage in the race, even though it could be in a better car. But it helps for racing in general, whatever. Good racing can be good in any car. Just to be better in a Viper.